Hi everyone! Happy Wednesday. Today is Wednesday. It's 1 o'clock London time, UK time. So today we have another live lesson for you, a live Instagram lesson. My name is Amber. I'm a teacher at Nassau English School London and I'm ready to teach you today. So today's class is going to be on the second conditional. A few of you have messaged me saying that you want to have a look at this, that you find it confusing or you don't understand how to use it, and if I can teach a class about the second conditional. So that is what I'm going to do today. Today's class is on the second conditional. I hope you're all well at home and that you are ready to learn today. So let's begin our class. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here and then we can start the lesson. Okay, so you should now be able to see the screen in front of you, and as I said, we're looking at the second conditional. So we use the second conditional to talk about impossible or imaginary situations. By imaginary situations, I mean things that are not real. If we think about aliens or monsters, these are types of imaginary things. Okay, so something that's not possible to be true. Okay, let's have a look at some example sentences. So the first one I have is, if I weren't in lockdown, I'd go to the beach. If I weren't in lockdown, I'd go to the beach. So we have two parts to this sentence. Part one is about lockdown, if I weren't in lockdown, and part two, I'd go to the beach. There are lots of us in lockdown across the world, and we can't do things that we would like to do normally. So part one is about lockdown. If this wasn't true, if we could change it, then we would do part two. We would go to the beach. But it's not possible to change the first part. Lockdown is real, it's happening. So part two is not possible, going to the beach. So you have, if I weren't in lockdown, I'd go to the beach. Notice here you have the word I'd. Okay, this is a contraction for I would. I would. Okay, let's have a look at another example. If I met the Queen of England, I would be so nervous. If I met the Queen of England, I would be so nervous. Okay, again, this is an imaginary situation. It is almost impossible, very, very, very unlikely to happen. And you have part one is meeting the Queen, and part two is being nervous. Okay, here I have I would, but we can use the contraction I'd. I would, I'd be so nervous. Okay, we'll have a look at one more example. Okay, if I were you, I would learn to drive. If I were you, I would learn to drive. Okay, again, this is an imaginary situation. It's not possible to be a different person, but also we use this in a way to give somebody advice. So you're telling somebody what you think they should do. Okay, so this is a way of giving somebody advice. So let's have a look how we form the second conditional. So this is your sentence structure. You have if plus past simple plus present conditional. Okay, this isn't very helpful. I want to break it down more so that you really understand how to use this. Okay, so I have put here that for the past simple, if we're using the verb to be, we're actually going to be using, oh, that's not going to help. You can't see it. We actually would use were. Okay, for instead of was, we would use were. And for your present conditional, I've broken it down. We're using would plus the infinitive verb. Would plus the infinitive verb. Don't worry, I have some more examples for you. Okay, so the next example we have is if he were younger. Notice verb to be, past tense, were. If he were younger, he would travel more. If he were younger, he would travel more. Okay, another example I have is, if I were rich, I would buy a castle. If I were rich, I would buy a castle. Again, that verb to be in past tense, but we're using were instead of was. If I were rich, I would buy a castle. Okay. So like the first conditional that I did a video on a few weeks ago, the order that we structure this sentence can vary. There are two options for how you structure your second conditional sentence. Okay, so we just looked at one option and this is the other. So we can also say would plus infinitive plus if plus past simple, or we can do if plus past simple plus would plus infinitive. These are two options. They have the same meaning. You can choose which one you use and you can mix between them. Okay, so two options that have the same meaning. We're going to have a look using would first. Okay, so these are the same sentences that we just used, but the reverse. So we now have, I would buy a castle if I were rich. I would buy a castle if I were rich. And he would travel more if he were younger. He would travel more if he were younger. Okay, both of these situations are either impossible situations or imaginary situations. Okay, it's not possible to change your age. You cannot be younger or older. You are your age. You can't change it. And the same about being rich. It's not possible to change that very easily. So we are talking about an imaginary situation, something that's not real at the moment. Okay, and we can also use the second conditional for questions. We're going to look at the two most common forms of these questions so that you can use these at home in your speaking and your writing. So the first one we're looking at is, what would you do if? What would you do if? So two examples here. What would you do if you won the lottery? And what would you do if you had one day to live? Okay, so two parts to this. What would you do if, and then your if clause. If you won the lottery, if you had one day to live, if you had all the money in the world, for example. Okay, and the other is if you. So the same, we can reverse the question form as well as the sentence. So if you were the president, what would you do? If you were an animal, what animal would you be? Again, we're talking about situations which are highly unlikely or impossible. Okay, we cannot be an animal. This is an impossible situation that we are discussing. Okay, and that is it. They are your rules for how to use the second conditional. I hope that you have followed today's class. It's a little bit shorter than normal, but what we're going to do when I finish this video, I'm going to go and upload some questions on Instagram stories so that you can answer those and check that you have understood today's class. I want to do some longer questions, which isn't always possible on the live stories. So thank you for following me on today's class. I will probably see you next week. I know that Nick is going to be doing a class with